June 1967, Route 19 between Anh and Pleiku, Vietnam. A single B-40 round back then was enough to tear apart the cab of an M35 military truck and kill the whole crew in seconds. 70% of the casualties on Route 19 at the time came from M35 cabs being hit straight on. 60% of the trucks rolled over after hitting mines because their center of gravity was too high. And nearly 80% of all ambushes started with a B-40 fired at the lead truck just to cut the convoy in half in 20 seconds. In 2 weeks, 4 convoys were smashed and 7 men were killed. No one wanted to run the route anymore. Until one engineer sergeant built the only truck that ever survived a B-40 hit the Iron Butterfly. The S-curve ahead was still hazy with dust from the ambush that had just taken place. One M35 lay flipped upside down in the middle of the road. The lead truck had its cab burned out, dragging the next vehicle into the ditch. The third truck had been blasted by a TM-46, almost torn in half. Farther down, fresh .50 caliber marks peppered the bed of the fourth. The M60 gunner had been taken out in the opening burst. The convoy had to halt. The troops spread along the roadside, setting up a hasty firing line, but they couldn't see any clear targets. Amid the wrecked trucks and scattered debris, Staff Sergeant Jack Doyle appeared uniformed, smeared with oil, holding an M2 carbine and his usual toolkit. He walked along each wreck, measuring where the B-40 had punched through the steel checking frames broken by mines and gun mounts shredded by DSHA fire. Doyle wrote in his notebook, "Cab armor, 2 to 3 mm not enough. Need 8 mm plates. M60 mount weak, replaced with 60 mm steel. Tubing use M113 bearings." When he spotted a 10 mm armor plate from a burned out M113, Doyle lifted it, tapped it with his knuckle, then told 2 transport soldiers, "Cut this piece. Bring it back to the shop." As the recovery team collected the wrecks at dusk, Doyle stood facing Route 19, gripping the armor plate, and in his mind, the idea for a truck that could survive where everything else had been destroyed was already taking shape. Route 19 was the only lifeline keeping Pleiku from being isolated, and every convoy cut in half meant the entire Western Front was paralyzed. 3 days after the ambush, the field repair shack at Anh was back in operation. Doyle sat in front of the cab armor plate that the B-40 had punched through, opened his notebook, and went over his analysis again. The cab was too thin, the truck's center of gravity was too high, and the gun mount was weak. All of it fell into the category of fixable. Doyle had seen far too many men lost simply because the trucks were too lightly built, and he swore he wouldn't let it happen again. The solution came, quickly add, 8 to 10 mm steel plates salvaged from scrapped M113s reinforce the cargo bed against fragments, and replace the gun mount with a rotating base using M48 bearings. Doyle calculated the added weight, roughly 400 kilos, but the frame and leaf springs could handle it with adjustments. A group of logistics, transport, and engineering officers came to hear his report. They had 3 concerns: lack of steel, the heavier truck struggling in mud, and the gun mount not meeting standard specs. Doyle didn't argue. He unfolded the GMC structural diagram, pointed out the load-bearing points, and stated simply, the reinforcements would sit directly on the strongest parts of the frame. Recoil could be absorbed by a damper taken from a damaged M35. Perforated steel would cut weight in areas less exposed to fragments. At the end of the meeting, as everyone left the room, Doyle closed his notebook. Buildable. 3 days, 6 men. He set the notebook on the pierced armor plate and started drafting the parts list from the salvage yard. The field workshop at Anh had originally been meant only for oil changes. Today it had become a place to build armor in the middle of a war zone. Doyle stepped inside, opened his sketch, and pointed at the burned-out M113 hull. He picked out the intact 10 mm steel plates, cut them with oxygas, then ground the edges smooth. The GMC cab was straightened, the armor plate set in place and welded down. Doyle tapped each weld, the sound was low and solid. Through the whole afternoon, the cab was covered with 4 additional plates, positioned exactly on the load-bearing points. For the gun station, he took 2 bearings from a discarded M35 axle, welded the rotating mount onto the cab roof, and installed the 50. The mount jammed at first. Doyle removed it, reground the steel track, and applied heat-resistant grease. On the second try, it spun cleanly. Doyle wrote a brief note, "Good." The B-40 standoff grid was an improvised IDEA chain-link mesh welded onto a 2x2-inch frame set 30 centimeters off the cab to force the round to detonate early. After vibration tests, every weld held firm. The engine section got a tune-up limiter, removed cooling fan, replaced with a longer blade version, and a temporary gauge installed to monitor load. During test runs in the yard, the engine ran smoother and heated up about 12% slower. The cab vibrated slightly on tight turns. Doyle added 2 support bars and the vibration disappeared. When the last armor plate on the cargo bed was finished, Doyle stepped back to take in the whole vehicle-armored cab, steady 50 cal turret, solid B-40 standoff grid. The test configuration was ready for combat. A transport soldier looked at the truck and asked, "What do we call it?" Doyle didn't turn around. Iron Butterfly. On the northern edge of Route 19, an NVA ambush team had been in position since the previous night. They had picked the perfect dead zone at the S-shaped bend, the spot where every convoy was forced to slow down, exposing the full side of the cab under an open firing angle. The squad leader had watched for weeks and identified the pattern. One B-40 into the lead truck's cab was enough to cut the convoy in half. After that, the rest would fall apart on their own. A DSHK was set on a downward slope, angled to fire, upward a firing line meant to tear open truck beds and hit the M60 gunners in the first burst. In their minds, this fight would unfold exactly like every other successful ambush B-40 to open, DSHK pinning the right flank, second RPG to finish the third truck. None of them knew that today in the convoy there was a vehicle they had never encountered before, and just as they settled into firing positions, the convoy appeared. Route 19. Early morning, Convoy 52 had left Ankei 12 minutes earlier. Iron Butterfly was the 4th truck. Doyle sat in the passenger seat, eyes scanning both sides of the road. As they reached the S-curve near Rock Point 402, the radio filled with static. The driver didn't finish his sentence before the ground ahead flashed. A B-40 from the left tree line shot straight into the lead M35's cab. A sharp blast, the steel door blew off its hinges. The lead truck plunged into the ditch. The driver died instantly. The entire formation jolted to a stop. The second truck braked hard. The passenger was thrown from the cab and knocked unconscious. Immediately, 50 caliber fire from the right tree line swept across the road. The first burst slamming into the hood, the driver collapsed over the wheel. Right side, 200 meters. 50, Doyle yelled. He slammed his hand against the cab. Move up. Close the line. Iron Butterfly dropped a gear rear, tires spinning mud before they caught. As the truck pushed past the choke point, the 50 cal turret on the roof opened up. The first burst shook the rotating mount. The gunner held a low aim and raked the exact patch of brush, still trembling. One firing point went silent instantly. Another flash from the left, an RPG launched. The round struck the B-40 standoff grid along the cab, exploding into a heavy thump of fragments. The shockwave kicked up a sheet of dust across the road. The mesh was bent, but the frame held. The cab remained intact. Doyle glanced over. Good. Keep going. Left tree line NVA POV. The RPG gunner froze launcher still in his hands. The cab of the M35 in front of him was untouched. How is it not down? A radio man muttered. The warhead blew early. What kind of armor is that? The squad leader frowned through his old Soviet binoculars. They put up a grid. B-40 blew outside. Can't punch through. He signaled an adjustment change angle. Aim low at the wheels. Take the axle, the truck will roll. But before they could reposition Iron Butterflies, 50 cal turret swung toward them, pinning them flat against the trench line. Dirt and rock exploded upward. An RPG man was knocked backward and the rest were forced to pull deeper into the brush. What kind of monster truck? Like it's armored, someone murmured as they retreated. The plan to cut the convoy in 20 seconds veered off course in the very first minute, all because of one unusual vehicle. The firing line on the left fell silent almost immediately. Iron Butterfly stopped broadside across the road, shielding the entire convoy behind its hull. 2 M60s from the cargo bed fired suppressive bursts to both flanks. The 7.62 rounds skimmed the grass, forcing the attackers' heads down in the trenches. A DSHK position on the left tried to rise. 350 call rounds hit Iron Butterfly's cab, leaving only glowing dents. No penetration. "Hold position," Doyle said. The turret swung left and hammered back. 3 seconds later, the firing point was silent. 3 RPG gunners on the right tried to relocate. The right side M60 swept low. 1 man went down the other, 2 pulled back into the forest. Behind them, the fuel truck shouted, "Wheel jammed, need cover." Wind pushed flames from the second truck toward the fuel tank. Doyle barked Iron Butterfly, back half a length, cover the right. The truck had barely moved when another B-40 detonated right in front of the fuel truck. Thanks to Iron Butterfly blocking the angle, the fragments missed the fuel tank. The turret answered instantly. All fire from that direction stopped. The exchange lasted over 2 minutes. When the attackers lost their main firepower, the convoy security team moved in to open an exit path. Iron Butterfly led the way, covering the entire formation as they pulled out of the kill zone. 800 meters beyond the danger area, the gunfire faded. A transport soldier ran up, looking the vehicle over from front to back, eyes wide. This thing took 1 B-40 2-point-blank RPGs and 3 bursts of 50, and it's still running. The turret gunner wiped sweat from his face, voice hoarse. "It holds. That's all that matters," Doyle said flatly. "Mission complete. Back to Key." Iron Butterfly turned around dented armor, bent mesh welds coated in burnt dust, but the engine ran as steady as it had at departure. In a small dugout north of Route 19, the NVA squad leader gathered his men after they withdrew. The dim oil lamp lit their dust-covered faces, still carrying the smell of propellant. On the dirt floor, he sketched the battlefield layout with the tip of a spent B-40 round. Opening shot correct. DSHK angle correct. Exit route according to plan. He slashed a hard mark across the dirt failure at the 4th target, the monster truck. A young fighter whispered, "The B-40 blew right on it, but the cab stayed whole, brother, high." The squad leader shook his head. "No, they put up a grid. Warhead detonated early, lost the penetrating jet." He added notes to the after-action summary with a Soviet pencil. "Enemy reinforced the cab with thick armor. Has B-40 standoff grid spaced 20 to 30 centimeters. Has fast rotating .50 cal turret heavy suppression." Then he wrote the conclusion, "Do not fire front on anymore." "Must hit the wheelbase or strike when it's in a tight turn?" another fighter asked. "So next time, can we take it out?" Hai Lua slid the chalk back into his pocket and stood up. "Yes, but we have to relearn. They adapted, we must adapt too." He ended with a line everyone in the dugout silently agreed with. Today it survived because it wasn't like the others. Next time we find the weak point, no matter how strong it is. The afternoon in Nkei was coated in a dull yellow light. The field workshop had just finished checking Iron Butterfly after the morning ambush. Burn marks still streaked the armor dents, had yet to be hammered out, and the warped B-40 grid was still covered in black dust. Doyle stepped down from the cab with his notebook of measurements, while several transport troops stood around the truck, as if looking at a teammate who had just returned from the edge of death. The workshop door swung open. First Lieutenant Greaves, Major Newman, and Captain Branson walked straight to the front of the truck. Greaves spoke first, voice cold and rigid. "Overloading, like this snapping an axle or rolling on a slope, is just a matter of time. If there's an accident, logistics takes the blame, not you." Doyle closed his notebook. "We recalculated the load. The leaf springs can handle it." Branson raised a regulation sheet. "The welds don't meet depot standards. Conclusion, unfit for operation." Newman continued, pointing up at the gun mount. "The 50 cal turret has no official approval. Unauthorized modification of heavy armament. Per regulation. 14-2, remove it immediately." The 3 officers paused as if expecting Doyle to react. He only said one sentence. "This truck saved the convoy this morning." Greaves didn't change expression. "Regulations aren't written for exceptions. Command requires a full inspection." Newman turned to the mechanics. "Prep the cutting torches. Strip the auxiliary armor and remove the mesh. Lock the turret." A young private blurted out, "Sir, Newman cut him off. "Silence. Orders are orders." Doyle looked straight at Branson. The cab took 350 cal hits and stayed intact. Remove the armor and the next driver will die. Branson answered flatly. Discussions over, the convoy troops gathered, forming a line in front of the truck. The M60 gunner from the morning fight spoke up, voice hoarse but firm. "Sir, this truck saved our whole team." Another added, "You guys don't run Route 19. Strip the armor and you're killing people." Greaves kept his icy tone. "Logistics decision stands." Newman added, "This vehicle is not up to standard. It's grounded." Doyle spoke quietly but sharp. "Stripping the armor is killing people." Greaves replied, "Sergeant, this truck isn't part of a combat unit. All modifications must follow regulations. I'm ordering you to comply." Doyle looked at him and spoke slowly. "Remove the armor and the truck won't run the route anymore. Anyone who wants to drive a stock truck can take it. My team won't." Branson's brow tightened. "Are you refusing orders?" Doyle answered, "I'm talking about lives." The air grew heavy. The troops stepped closer, silent, but clearly choosing a side. Newman folded his arms, speaking each word like a weight. "If every unit builds vehicles their own way, the system collapses." A transport soldier shot back, "Your system doesn't protect us out there. This truck does." Greaves stepped forward. "Final decision, remove all non-standard armor. Finish by today." Doyle placed a hand on the truck's hull, then turned and spoke loudly enough for the whole yard to hear, "No one touches Iron Butterfly. I'll take responsibility. If needed, I'll file a report, but this armor stays and this truck will run the next route." Newman and Greaves exchanged a look. Finally, Newman said, "Leave it as is for now. We'll report this up the chain." They walked away, faces drawn tight. When the workshop doors closed behind them, a young private whispered, "So, the truck's staying the way it is." Sergeant Doyle shut his notebook and answered evenly, "For now. Next run, it'll have to prove itself again." At the same time, in the logistics office, Branson opened the technical file and added one short line. "Up armored truck, recommend evaluation for wider adoption." Doyle's name wasn't on it. The next morning, 2 of his men were summoned for questioning for unauthorized modification of a combat vehicle. News of Convoy 52 surviving the ambush spread through the transport companies faster than any official report. A single word of mouth, "There's an armored M35 that took a B-40 and kept going," was enough to draw units along Route 19 and even Highway 1 to the salvage yard to see exactly how Iron Butterfly had been reinforced. Transport troops measured steel thickness, studied how Doyle welded the load-bearing points, asked about the turret bearings, and learned how to position a B-40 standoff grid so the warhead would detonate away from the cab. There were no orders, no technical manuals, just watching, learning, and building. Scorched armor plates from wrecked M113s became more valuable than anything else in the yard. Within 2 weeks, the companies along the route had produced their first gun trucks. One finished in Pleiku, another assembled in Ankae, and a third built in Thanh An. The chassis was still the M35. Armor was cut from old truck beds or salvaged from M113 hulls. The 50 cal turret was mounted offset to the left, so the M60 gunner would have room to stand. Soldiers painted names on the doors in white, the Brutus, the Untouchable, and many others no one remembers exactly. Only that they followed the same spirit. Doyle had started armored cabs, fixed gun turrets, B-40 standoff grids, spaced off the cab, and lowered center of gravity to avoid rolling on Route 19. The action reports showed a clear shift. Gun trucks were placed in the middle of the convoy, a position that let them close in on any firing point on either side of the road. Some crews even tried light zigzagging through brushy curves to draw RPG fire into more manageable angles. Thanks to the 10mm armor and early detonation mesh, the cargo trucks behind them avoided many direct hits. When an ambush happened, the fixed 50 cal turret allowed the gunner to sweep a firing point in a single burst, while the 2 M60s in the cargo bed kept their fire low, suppressing B-40 teams hiding in shallow pits. Before the gun trucks, the Ankae Pleiku stretch often cost 3 to 5 men per convoy, and even more during heavy activity weeks. After the first 3 gun trucks joined the formations, casualties dropped by nearly half. The number of destroyed vehicles fell sharply, especially fuel and ammo trucks, the easiest targets. The division staff noted the improvement in the weekly report, describing it as protection levels exceeding expectations. No one mentioned Doyle, but the model he created had already spread and become the shared rule of thumb armor, up front grid, outside 50, on top, M60s on the sides. 2 weeks after the first trial, by fire, Route 19 had 11 gun trucks in service. Each one was different in small details, but all followed the same principle: turn a truck into a shield. For the whole convoy improvised but effective, born from the basic need to survive. From then on, Doyle's idea became the survival method of an entire transport line. The afternoon wind carried fine dust over the body of Iron Butterfly. The armor still bore dents that hadn't been repaired, marks from the ambushes it had taken in place of the convoy. Doyle stood beside it one last time before leaving the route. He placed his hand on the armor warm under the sun and exhaled slowly, as if saying goodbye to a steel teammate. 2 weeks later, he boarded a C-141 out of Quai Non. As the plane lifted off the runway, the ridgelines in the familiar red road came into view, below the place where for months, trucks meant only for hauling, cargo had been forced to live like fighting vehicles. Doyle watched them shrink away, knowing that a combat engineer sergeant like him had unknowingly created something that existed in no manual, yet had saved more than a few lives. Back in Texas, Doyle returned to his family's old repair shop. Pickup trucks and farm machines filled his workdays. But every time he bent under a chassis and listened to the low, rough hum of an engine, a chain of sounds from Route 19 came back to him. The strained growl of a truck hauling dense armor, the rattle of steel mesh slapping the cab over potholes, the heavy kick of a 50 cal shaking the bed beneath the gunner's feet. Those sounds clung to him like a habit he could never break. Sometimes someone asked him about Vietnam. Doyle only answered briefly, "Did my job, fixed a few trucks." He didn't say more, maybe because so much of it couldn't be put into words. Years passed. Then in the summer of 2003, when Iraq erupted, Doyle saw a familiar sight on television: American supply convoys moving through ambush country, with 50 cal turrets on the roofs, side gunners gripping their weapons, improvised armor plates welded on, and RPG standoff grids fixed along the sides, all of it looking exactly like what he had once built in Ingenuity. A later news article wrote about the gun truck revival, adopting convoy protection models from Vietnam-era experience. In a new logistics manual, he read the line, "Originating from field innovations in Vietnam, 1967-1970. He folded the paper without saying anything. That night, Doyle walked out to the backyard. An old pickup sat with its hood open, the afternoon's work unfinished. He switched on the light, leaned in to check the engine, and then stopped, looking at the truck as if he were seeing the shape of Iron Butterfly, rough-bent, scorched, and scarred, but still alive, still moving forward. Iron Butterfly was surely scrapped long ago, the other gun trucks too, but the idea remained: running the road from Vietnam to Iraq, riding with convoys Doyle would never meet. And that was enough. A small line in a military article mentioning the gun truck revival was perhaps all that was needed to place his mark in the history of a supply route most people had long forgotten.